Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 146th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on a mighty blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. If you're new to the blaze, welcome. We're a group of volunteer creatives who host online literary events to support books, authors, and the wider publishing community. Here on Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host, Joe Moldover, and I bring to you conversations between authors and bookstores, authors about bookstores, the whole shebang. We've featured authors and bookstores in every U.S. state, plus Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Canada, England, and Scotland since we launched 3.5 years ago. Today, I'm very excited to welcome the delightful and talented Sara DiVello to the show. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I'm so excited to be here.
I am very happy to have you. Let me share your bio just for a moment with our audience. So Sara is a true crime writer and the creator and host of Mystery and Thriller Mavens, which is a popular author series and interactive Facebook group. We're going to include a link below. If you're not already a member, you can join today. Through her work with Mystery and Thriller Mavens, she has hosted author events, interviewing more than 300 writers. She's also the director of social media strategy for the International Thriller Writers Association, and she's the author of 2 books, the memoir, Where in the Am I, and her debut novel, Broadway Butterfly, which we're going to discuss today. Sara's also a freelance writer. You found her articles in Marie Claire, Elle, Cosmo, and a whole bunch of other publications, and she's coming to us today from Boston. Welcome.
Yay.
Okay, so to our audience, if you have questions for Sara, we'd love to hear them. Please post them as a comment below, and we'll get to as many as we can during the show. So Sara, congratulations on Broadway Butterfly. You have the book right there behind you to show off. Oh, right there. It's such a great cover. It's such a fun book. And the reviews are terrific. Kirkus calls Broadway Butterfly a juicy, roaring 20s crime yarn set in red-hot Manhattan. Library Journal calls the book compelling. Publishers Weekly says this kaleidoscopic mystery impresses with its thoroughness and poignancy. Vanity Fair says this is a page-turning murder mystery that will appeal not only to thriller buffs, but to readers of narrative history and historical true crime. That's just some of the buzz. Like some of it. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored, and I was so terrified to get every single review, and then so relieved when they were when they were okay. And
no, they're great. Wait, did you read every single review? Like, do you have a Google alert for your name in your book?
I do have a Google alert, and then I put them on my website as well.
Okay. So can you tell our audience about the book for those people who have not yet read Broadway Butterfly? What is your novel about?
So Broadway Butterfly is the true story of a 100-year-old cold case. So 100 years ago, a scandalous flapper named Dot King was found murdered in her bed in Midtown Manhattan, wearing a lacy negligee that barely reached her knees, Kimberly. And the ramifications from the investigation ripple from the gangster underworld all the way up to the White House. And what I love about the story is that it is true. And like all true stories, they are too crazy to make up. And I told it in the style of a novel. Yes. And so it takes place in the fabulous, fun, roaring 20s, which is an era that I love, from the fashion to the music to the fabulous flappers. And Dot King was a gal about town. She was the Manhattan it girl. She was known as the most beautiful girl in New York City. She was a professional model. And she was seen in all the most fabulous cabarets, clubs, and speakeasies, hanging out with the rich and powerful on both sides of the law. Yep. And so when she turned up dead, it was a scandal that rocked New York City and then the nation. So I couldn't wait to dive on in and tell the story and share it with the world.
Now, you found out about the story of Dot King in a surprising way.
Yes.
Right? Can you tell us a little bit about how Dot King came into your life and what inspired you to dive into this topic for your first novel?
Yes. So Dot King came into my life, and I love thinking of it like that, in the most extraordinary way on what started out as the most ordinary of days. So 10 years ago, this Thanksgiving, I can't believe it was an entire decade ago, I was home in Philadelphia, for Thanksgiving, as I am every year. And, the day after Thanksgiving, there's not that much going on. So we were eating our leftover turkey sandwiches and hanging out with my aunts and uncles and cousins and, sharing family stories and reminiscing. And conversation, turned to retelling, old stories as families often do. And so my uncle Ed shared that back in the 60s, after high school let out, he and my uncle David used to sneak over to the old Stotesbury estate where they would sneak cigarettes and drink beers on the, grand estate. And I had to know more because everything about this sounded so fun. And so he was saying that, back in the day, this was this Gilded Age mansion, and ruins of it still exist there today. So all 11 of us pile into cars, we caravan over, to the next suburban development next to my aunt's house. And there in between the Subarus and the tulip beds and the big wheels were indeed the ruins of a great Gilded Age estate. So 50-foot tall pillars stretching up into the sky, and a grand staircase in the middle of a field, and then headless statues of Diana and Zeus in someone's backyard next to like my little red wagon. It was so cognitively dissonant and bizarre. And by the way, I share pictures and videos of this on my website, which is saradivello.com.
Yep. We'll include a link below. Yep.
Behind the scenes, so you can see how weird it is, just how bizarre to be standing in suburban Philadelphia looking at what looks like the ruins from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. And so I had to know more. I dove down the rabbit hole. I learned everything about this Gilded Age mansion: 147 rooms, 28 bathrooms, 24 fireplaces. I mean, it was really crazy. And then I found out that this mansion was connected to an unsolved murder. And I knew that was a story I had to tell.
One of the things that story's crazy. Like, that's just crazy that there's like a staircase in the middle of a field. I mean, I like the idea that you might have a headless kind of statue or pillar in your backyard that adds a little something different to the suburbs, but that all these homes were built around it. I don't know, that seems almost sinister in a way.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. So this home was on a 300-acre estate. So that's a lot of land.
Yeah.
And eventually it fell into disrepair and was destroyed, was torn down. And so they, wanted to put the land to use. And so they turned it into a suburban development, where all the split level ranch look pretty much the same. Mm-hmm. And so it is so bizarre to see someone's home, their car, their flower bed, their little, happy spring flags, and then, have these ruins of this history behind it. And the home is really fascinating itself. I mean, during World War II, they became afraid that the Nazis were going to, bomb the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So they actually packed up all of the most valuable priceless treasures in the Met and took them by truck to Philadelphia and stored them in the Stotesbury mansion. Wow. Because there were 6 floors, 3 above ground and 3 below ground. And so the 3 below ground were pretty safe from bombings. Wow. And they stayed there for 3 years, these priceless works of art. And then when the war was over, they took them back to New York. I mean, it's just so bizarre what this home has been through.
Now, one of the things that I really liked about this book was how successfully you captured the era of the 20s. And it makes me think about that now, like all the layers of history that you had to unearth to get to this story, not unlike this estate, right? All the layers, yes. All the skeletons of the past, yes. In there. And when I read the book, you weave in all these issues that are still really relevant today: racism, sexism, but you also got the voice of how people spoke to one another. And I wondered, how hard was that? And how did you do that? Because as a modern reader, we have these ideas of how people talked or acted. And maybe we don't really, they come to us from the movies, right? Like, or from other kinds of fiction. And yet it requires a lot of research and effort to create that. So tell us a little bit about how you went about capturing the era.
So first of all, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And second of all, that was really important to me. So I am a big time nerd who cares deeply about craft. So I study what work, and I love historical works, both fiction and nonfiction. So I study what works and what doesn't work. And one of the things that I notice is that the writers who try to stick unerringly to the to the mores of the time, especially if those are really old, like 1800s, 1700s, 16 1400s. It makes it unreadable because it becomes a speed bump for the reader. So if you're talking about vowels and thou hast hath no, it's like, ooh, that's tough. So one of the things that I had noticed worked really well was in books that I enjoyed reading, was to take some flavor and sprinkle it through, but not be so, holding it in a hammerlock grip that it becomes tough to read. And so I researched the slang and the sayings of the time. And fortunately, the 1920s are really fun. So I think we should bring back some of them, like the bee's knees. Why aren't we all saying that? We should be saying that all the time. Like, or, I can't, call it's, I mean, some things maybe you don't want to bring back, but there's a lot of fun expressions. And so I sprinkled them in, and I think of it as seasoning. I like to cook. So I'm like, this is salt. You don't want to over salt.
Yep.
You want some flavor. And so I tried to zhuzh it up and give us some good flavor. And then I also, so that was sort of the method to my madness. And then in terms of how I did that, in addition to researching the slang and sayings of the time, because throughout the 9 years that it took me to research and write this book, I amassed over 1,700 pieces of original research. And because my lead character, Julia Hartman, was a reporter at the time, I was able to get all of her articles. So when I started this a decade ago, she worked for the New York Daily News. Those archives were not digitized. So I had to go to the New York Public Library, the Milstein microfilm room, and feed reels of microfilm through the machine, and then slide by slide on the glass plate, look for them, because that's not searchable. And so I would then find her articles, and then I would print them out one by one. Then about 5 years into my research, the New York Daily News did digitize. So that made life a lot more easier because I could search for her, and a lot of her articles weren't bylined. Very few people had bylines. So most of them were, but some of them weren't. And then at one point, when it becomes dangerous for her to keep reporting on this case, she actually chooses to go dark and not use her byline for her own, to save her own life and for her own safety and well-being. But then I could still search by the name of the victim, .king, or the people involved in the case, or the suspects. So first I printed them all out. Then I read them all. Then I recorded myself reading them all. Then I transcribed them all. So by listening and by reading and by writing, I ingrained in my memory, deep into my bones, the rhythm and patter of her speech.
That's fascinating.
You're like, I regret asking. That is too much.
No. I think it's, part of what we do on this show is have conversations with authors about how they write their books and how they embrace their topic. And I think the one thing that comes away from that is that there's no clear path. This is the way you do it. Many authors have different approaches. I think that's fascinating. This sort of almost like, how you study for math final. You have to put the proofs on a piece of paper and, repeat them to yourself, or learning a new language, like going to the language lab and listening over and over. It's kind of like what you did. I think that's fascinating.
And I know that if I write something down, and if I learn it more than one ways, by first reading, then writing, then listening, then repeating, by doing it multiple ways. So first of all, repetition. And then second of all, by different ways of inputting that information, I can remember it better. So then in the few scenes that I pulled as much as I could of the dialogue from direct quotes, but sometimes there would be a missing response. So when I had to recreate that response, I had it so deep in my bones that the words that they would use, the pattern of their speech, that I could have a plausible guess of what the response would have sounded like.
So we have a question from the audience. Kim O'Connor Rudder. Hi, Kim. So ask us a similar question about your research process. How did you know to do it this way? How how did you know how to begin your research? So we have a lot of readers who watch our show, but also writers. And I think historical fiction, well, I know for me, it sounds like, oh my gosh, you know, the research process alone would take such a long time. So I echo Kim's question. Like, how did you even know where to begin your process?
Well, first of all, Kim, thank you so much for joining us and for your excellent question. And so, first of all, I'm a hack. I had to figure this out as I go. And fortuitously, I suffer from anxiety and a slight case of OCD. And so I was really able to put those tools to work for me and obsessively, compulsively research this. So it did take a long time. It took 9 years. And I think the reason that took me so long is first I had to learn how to do it. And then I had to actually do it. So going through slide by slide at the New York Public Library was very, very time consuming.
Yeah.
Because again, there is no search function. So the way that I first started to get into it was, okay, so I found that this mansion, this Gilded Age estate, the third largest private home in the country, bigger than the White House, was connected to a murder. Excuse me. So I knew I wanted to tell that story. Okay, how can I learn more about this case? And of course, I was really lucky that there was a lot of newspaper archives about it. And so then I just started with every single newspaper article that I could find. And because one of my characters, real life characters, was the lead reporter on this, I had all of her incredible articles that she had typed on her, 1923 typewriter with her hands, and that just felt so magical. So I wanted to start first with those articles. Then I wanted to see how the other newspapers and how the other reporters were covering this case, because while the facts of the case remain the same, the way that the case was covered and the words used to describe both the victim and the suspects were very different based on, I think, the reporter's own inherent life interests and experience and whatever. So I started with those. Okay, thank you, Donna. I started with those newspaper articles, and then I thought, okay, how can I go deeper? And so then I interviewed a lot of professors. So I interviewed 3 police officers, 3 police detectives who specialized in homicide, and I asked them, okay, walk me through. You get to a murder scene, you get to a crime scene. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you looking at? And then because I didn't want to just be through one person, because maybe he's a weirdo, no, they're all great, but I wanted to talk to others. So I, then talked to other, I interviewed 2 other homicide detectives. And then I thought, well, I really want to learn more about those times. And so I interviewed a bunch of professors at, some various colleges, Boston College, Amherst College, law schools. I wanted to, this takes place during an election year. And which is also interesting, 100 years ago, when the Republican incumbent has just announced his just thrown his hat in the ring. And this President Harding, who was interestingly the most scandal-ridden, rumor president until 2016. So the parallels are really, really interesting.
It is very modern.
Very modern. So then I interviewed a professor who studied, election history and, and how election law and election fraud and that particular political campaign. And so, I interviewed that person. Then interviewed, a professor who studies the intersection of women by race and class at the turn of the century, Professor Martha Saxton. And it's like, oh, that's perfect for me. So then I wanted to talk to her. And so I just kept digging and digging and digging. And I think, to answer Kim's question, the most important thing isn't being trained as a researcher. The most important thing is persistence, a dogged curiosity, and unflagging persistence.
I was going to say, listening to you, it seems like that you're just motivated by an intense curiosity. Like, what about this? And what about this? And I think that's a great lesson for anyone watching who wants to write a novel that's set in a historical fiction novel. Being curious is probably your best tool, and asking what if and what about this and how does that work? And those little details can really end up bringing you on a whole new avenue in your story, I would imagine.
Exactly. And then one of the professors I talked to, Professor Christopher Wilson at Boston College, who studied I want to make sure I get this right, the portrayal of police interrogation and violence in at the turn of the century in the media, which was, I mean, that's so specific. That's the cool thing about about professors. They hone in on this one tiny little thing that just happened, and you find the right professor and their treasure trove of information. And so he said to me, well, what are you doing for research? I said, well, I'm getting all of Julia's articles and then all these other articles. And he's like, wait, you're not just reading the articles, are you? And I was like, yes, of course. And he's like, no. You got to look at the ads around the edge of the paper. You got to read the ads. The ads will tell you what people care about, what people are buying, what motivates them. And I was like, oh my God, you're right.
Wow.
Back to all the articles, because poor jerk, I had only clipped out the article about the murder. And so then I zoomed out on the whole page, and it is fascinating because some of the companies are, oh, yay, Donna, I'm so excited. I love libraries. Tell me what library you're near. Some of the companies are the same. Wrigley's was still making chewing gum. Maybelline was still making mascara. Some of these things are just, women still wanted thicker, glossier, longer hair. People still cared very deeply about their digestion and indigestion. But some things have changed. Like we're no longer ingesting mercury as a curative measure. We're no longer taking mercury by the teaspoon.
So one of the things I wanted to ask about when you talk about craft and how you're a big craft nerd is the structure of this novel. Because that for me was I was very intrigued by that. And so this story has 4 points of view. We are with the detective, Coughlin. Yes. We are with Julia, the reporter. We are with Ella, the maid. And we are with Frances. And Frances is...
The society.
I was like, how do I describe who Frances is? Not giving anything away. Okay. Yeah. And I found that to be so interesting that we have these 4 POVs. Yeah. And we alternate between them.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, how did you decide to have 4 POVs? Why did you decide to have these four POVs? And what do you think having these POVs brings to the story that you couldn't have gotten if you, for example, just had Julia narrating the book?
Yes. Okay. So this was a decision I labored long and hard over. So first of all, Frances was the first person who came to me because she is the daughter of the Stotesbury estate. She's a Stotesbury.
Yes.
So it's her father who has built this 147 room Gilded Age mansion. Hi, Robin. It's so good to see you. Yay.
Yes, it is very cool, Robin.
So, Frances came to me first because I found this mansion first. And interestingly, it wasn't the murder or the murder weapon or the police detective that came to me first. It was chapter 28. So if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read the book, remember chapter 28. And then DM me when you get there, because that was the scene that came to me. And I was like, oh my God, what would that have been like? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then so I knew Frances had to be a point of view. And then of course I thought, well, when I found out that a female reporter was the lead reporter, at the time, this is at a time when less than 20% of women work outside the home. That number today in America is about 60% of American women work outside the home, but then it was less than 20. So the very few women who worked outside the home worked primarily in factories, as telephone operators, or in shops, shop assistants, sales girls, or in domestic service. And Julia was none of those. She worked as a newspaperman, and we use that term, a gender normative term, the way that we used to say fireman, policeman,
right. Mailman.
Right. Now it's firefighter, police officer, whatever. But then it was, very masculine leaning. So she considered herself a newspaperman. And the very few women who worked in newspapers at that time covered what was known as the ladies' pages, which were cooking, astrology, and advice for the lovelorn. So there's a really great column that, thanks to Professor Wilson, I started reading called How to Get and Keep a Man. Love that. Or another of my favorites was How to Be Happy Though Married.
Though married? How to be happy though married?
Correct. And which I'm reading, as learning. And so Julia did not, and then of course the society pages, which were celebrity gossip. What were the celebrities of the time, which were the women of society, the wealthiest echelon, the Kardashians of the time? What were they wearing? Who were they partying with? Who were they dating? And Frances was one of those trendsetters. So 2 weeks before the murder, she's named one of the 4 most powerful women in society. That wealthy echelon is setting all the trends, whose mere gaze could stop a social climber in her tracks. So she is wielding, Frances is wielding her power in that very particular way. And Julia, again, at a time that women have very, very little power, is a reporter, and not on the ladies' pages, but on the hard-hitting news of the crime beat. So at this time, there were 3,500 members of the union, the New York Newspaper Union. There were 35 members of the Women in Newspapers Club. That's 1%.
Wow.
3,500 men, 35 women.
And
Julia is the rare woman who's not doing the cooking or astrology. And she's throwing elbows with the men. She's covering the hard-hitting crime, which is considered too intense for the delicate, female, constitution. And she is on the front lines of this. And then the men, at the New York Times and the other newspapers are soon racing to keep up with her, because she becomes the best in the city, not the best woman, the best, full stop. And so I knew she had to be one of the points of view. Detective Coughlin, I wanted him to be one of it. He's the head of the NYPD Detectives Unit. He has 1,200 men reporting to him. He's the son of an Irish cop. He's a first-generation Irish-American cop himself, so son of a cop himself. He works his way up from the patrol in the Tenderloin district up to the racetracks, then to detective, then head of detective. He's a big, powerful, important person. And I knew that he would have insights into the case that Julia, who's just covering the case, couldn't have. So I had to have him. And then Ella Bradford, who's the one who discovers the body, who worked for Dot, but was also her closest friend, her confidant, the keeper of all her secrets. She had to be one of the points of view, not just because she was the only one in this whole case who knew Dot, who knew her deeply and well, but also because Ella Bradford is an extraordinary human being who deserves her story to be told. She's one of the 7 million Black Americans who's part of the Great Migration, which is in the wake of the Civil War and rampant legalized segregation, racism, and discrimination, migrates from the South up to the non-segregated North in search of creating a better life for herself. So Ella Bradford sat in a segregated, quote, colored waiting room in Jacksonville, Florida, to get on a, quote, colored train car to get to New York, where she knew no one and nothing, and was 1,000 miles from home to make a better life for herself. That is a story that deserves to be told, and courage and bravery that deserves to be honored. And I had to tell that story.
There's also this element of these 4 points of view. They layer on one another, right? Yeah. A bit like a prism, sort of seeing the same view, but from different angles.
Thank you for saying that. That was really hard, because each of them has a point of view in the case that the others don't have, right? Like Detective Coughlin has insights because he's the lead detective. He has information that nobody else has. Ella, who's the only one who knew Dot and who was working very closely with her in Dot's line of work, has information that nobody else has. And so I wanted, and the same for Frances and Julia. So I wanted each character to share their unique point of view, but I didn't realize when I started out how hard it would be to layer all of these, because each point of view should have their own narrative arc. So what is Ella's journey from where she starts to where she ends up? It can't just be flat. She's got to have trials, tribulations, a denouement, a big ending. Julia, same thing, all 4 of them, but they can't all be peaking and resolving at the same time, because then it would be like too much adrenaline. I'd exhaust the reader, and then we'd be like, we'd be in a post-adrenal crash needing a cig. So I've been reading too much 1920s. Everybody smoked back then. So I had to make sure that they were all peaking and ebbing and flowing at different times. But then the narrative arc of the story had to also be propelled forward by those 4 points of view. So that was when my brain started to get like really frazzled and tired.
I can imagine your workspace had like lots of timelines and post-it notes and moving things around, and the arcs of the characters and the arcs of the story, all different colors. And
Yes.
Am I tapping into your sort of inner type A kind of?
Yes, exactly. So the movie A Beautiful Mind, where
Yes.
that's what it looked like. So I have my own little office, but my office is only 6 by 9. So I had those giant post-it notes, but it quickly ran out of space because I had character arcs for each of the characters. Then I had a chronology of the case, day by day, what clues were revealed. Then I had character studies of each of the characters and the victim and all of the people involved in the investigation, and then their families and their family histories. So then my very understanding husband let me take over the living room, and it's a little beautiful mindy in here, but that's the process.
So one of the things about this book that's really intriguing is that Dot King's murder is famously unsolved. And even though this when you begin reading the novel, you're pulled in nonetheless. And I wondered if you saw this outcome that no one was arrested, right? Like we don't actually know who killed her. Did you see that as an opportunity or as a limitation? And do you think that drove your process in a different way? Do you think it gave you more freedom than you might have had there been had it been a closed case with an outcome that was shared?
So I set out to solve this case. I was literally, 10 years ago, I was like, oh, my God, must I do everything? It's so exhausting to be me. I am not a detective. I have no forensics experience. I've never written a mystery before, and it's a 90-year-old cold case, but stand back, everyone. Detective DiVello is reporting for duty. Like I will solve this. And if dogged determination, relentless persistence are the keys to doing that, good thing I've got that.
Yeah.
And so I was determined. Okay. So a couple years into the case, I realized, oh my God, there's a reason this case has been unsolved for 90 years. This is really twisty and really intense. So I decided to hire a psychic who works with law enforcement on cold cases because, again, DiVello is determined and I'm going to make it happen. So she had started out working with her local police, then state police, then FBI, and she helps them find the bodies. And I had been hearing that psychics could do this, but I just, don't go to psychics. So
I love this so much. Keep going.
So I was teaching at I'm also a yoga teacher. So I was teaching at the Maine Yoga Festival, and I was signing copies of Where in the Am I? And a woman came up to me and bought a book, and I signed up for her, and we started chatting. And then she said that she was a psychic who worked with law enforcement. And I was like, universe, is that you? Like, bringing me this woman? And so I hired her, and I was very suspicious and very skeptical because I thought, how do we know this stuff is real? And how are we going to make sure that this, how can I make sure this isn't just hooey?
Yeah, right. Like a scam. Yeah.
So I said, how does this work? And she said, okay, so I want you to, this was over Skype. This was back in the dark days pre-Zoom. So she said, I want you to write a letter to the victim or whoever you want to talk to, and then ask her all the questions, but don't show it to me. And I was like, ooh, I'm intrigued because now we're going to test how good you are, Melissa. And so I wrote a letter, and then she said, and anyone else you want to talk to? So I thought, well, gosh, I should talk to everyone, but I'll start with Dot. So I wrote, Dear Dot, who killed you? And then I was like, oh my God, how rude. I'm so sorry. I should have introduced myself first. Dear Dot, my name is Sarah, who killed you? And then I was like, that just feels a little aggressive. Like, you don't walk up to someone and just ask such a personal question, hey, Kimberly, I don't know. It's something really, really personal. Like, ooh, yeah. When was your last gynecological exam? Ooh, too
much.
And so I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to craft a professional, personable, non-intrusive, but getting to the end of things, getting to the heart of the matter, letter to a dead woman. And I finally, should it be Dear Miss King? Dear Dot? Like, how do I start? I don't know, Kimberly. I don't know. So I finally got it. I never felt really satisfied with it, but I did get to it. And I ended up asking her, 7 questions. Was it 7 or was it 10? I can't remember. It was 7 or 10 questions. And then Melissa said, fold it up, put it in your pocket or under your computer, and then do that for that same process for every person you want to talk to. So I said, okay. And at the end of the session, you could have knocked me over with a freaking feather. Every single one of those questions had been answered in the order that I wrote them. Yeah, wow. It was freaky. It was crazy. And while Dot did not give me the full name of the person who killed her, she gave me his initial of his first name. And it happened to be the initial of one of the suspects. But the problem was I had written the book with the other guy doing it.
Oh.
Because I got so frustrated, I was like, I'm just gonna write it this way and call it a novel. So then I was like, no, fine, I'll redo it. So it took me the better part of a year to rip out that whole through line and rewrite it.
Wow.
Introducing this clue. But that was, I then with his first initial found, because I said to Melissa, that is not him. It's the other guy. And she said, Dot wants you to look at this guy. And I said, are you sure? Make sure you get it right. I mean, is it like a long distance telephone connection? Do you have a good line? Do you have a good connection? Is there any static on the line? Maybe she really said the other guy's name. And she was like, hold on, let me check. And then she comes back and she's like, no, she said this initial. And I'm not saying what it is because I don't want to give it away. But DM me and I'll ask you. I'll tell you. And so then I said, but Melissa, I ran it to ground. There's nothing more to find about that guy. It's not him. And she said, she wants you to try one more time. And she drew Dot drew something for her. And I was like, what does it mean? What does it mean? So I was stomping around my house so mad that this, because I knew how much work this was going to be. And then my baby sister, Hannah, who said, let's just very soothingly, let's just, take this one step at a time. And as I was laying on the floor, kicking and screaming. And then she said, let's, go back. And Hannah found on WorldCat, which is, I don't know if anyone knows what that is, it is a listing of the holdings of every library in the world. And so if you're looking for a very rare book, WorldCat will tell you which library in the world it is in. And Hannah found that WorldCat had 2 copies left of a tell-all memoir written by the secretary to the police commissioner of New York City about this case. And one of them was at the University of Pennsylvania. So rare books collection. And so I grabbed my keys. I said to my husband, I got to drive to Philadelphia. See you in 12 hours. And he was like, wait, maybe they can PDF it for you. So I went back inside and I called them and they said they didn't have it. And I said, well, WorldCat says you do. And it's, row 57, box 52, whatever. I had the row, the box, the folder number. And he said, let me call you back. And he called me back an hour later. He said, I've worked here for 30 years. I had no idea, but we do have this holding, but we didn't know it was in there. So we haven't preserved it. So the paper is disintegrated.
Oh no.
So now we have to get an antique paper expert in here to see how we can preserve this paper and lift it out.
Wow.
So it was crazy, all because I did a session with a psychic who talked to the dead woman who gave me the initial that led to this whole thing.
Okay, 146 episodes of the show. We've never had someone share that they consulted with a psychic for the writing of their book. It's a crazy story, but also it's just a story about how you have to be open to all the different opportunities that present themselves in your process of writing your book, right? Like relentless, we said, right? Persistent.
Right. You can't, what are you going to do? Say you have this opportunity and turn away?
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
Wow, Sarah. So thank you for sharing that. Wow. I love that. So you just mentioned the University of Pennsylvania's library, and we love libraries here, of course, and we also love independent bookstores. And I would be remiss if I didn't have a chat with you about bookstores. And so you do some work with Murder by the Books, which is an indie bookstore. It's in Texas, right? And we have had them on the show before. And so my partner in crime, Joe will find, we had them on with Megan Abbott, I think. So we'll find that show and we'll put it below. So tell us about what you do with Murder by the Books.
So I partnered with Murder by the Book in the spring of 2021 because I learned that tragically one independent bookstore a week went out of business permanently, shuttered their business, never to reopen during the pandemic. And
True.
I was already doing my interview series. And I thought to myself, why I'm pouring all of this time and energy and my own money into website hosting and all of that, all of that stuff. Why am I not? How can I know the statistic and not be doing anything about it? So I wanted to get boots on the ground to do what I could to support an independent bookstore. And I wanted to work with a woman-owned independent bookstore. And because mysteries and thrillers are my lifeblood, I wanted to work with one of the 3 independent mystery and thriller dedicated bookstores in the country. And so I partnered with the wonderful folks at Murder by the Book and have been in partnership with them for 2.5 years now. And so I stream all my interviews to their channels, and I drive all of my sales to their bookstore. And because they have a thriving in-store in-person series, I'm able to offer the incredible opportunity of offering signed personalized books to my audience. So you can get a book personalized to your mom by an author who maybe isn't coming to a neighborhood near you. So it's been really, really amazing to partner with them and to be able to support them and to be able to offer this incredible opportunity to my audience, to my mavens. So
And
that's them.
And we're including links to get Broadway Butterfly from them below in the broadcast. So please, to our audience, go check out the store and Sarah's book if you haven't read it already. But you are based in Boston, and we are lucky in the Boston area to have so many wonderful independent bookstores. Is there one here in the Boston area that you want to give a shout out to?
Oh my God. So we're so lucky to have so many incredible bookstores here. So I love Trident. Trident's nearest me.
Yep.
I live right in the city. So I love Trident books. I also love Porter Square Books. The team there is amazing. Brookline Booksmith is amazing. Wellesley Books is amazing. There are so many incredible bookstores in Massachusetts. Some of my other favorite bookstores are Nantucket Bookworks and Mitchell's on Nantucket.
Yes.
I love them, and they just won an incredible award for their longevity and their dedication to the community last night. In New York, I love Shakespeare & Co. I love The Strand. In Philadelphia, I love Capricorn Books, which is the cutest little husband and wife high school sweetheart team who just opened a bookstore in November. And I think the hopefulness of that, of choosing to open a bookstore during these tough times, resonates with me. So when I did my Philadelphia book launch event in an actual haunted castle with 67 unique gargoyles, I partnered with Capricorn Books to do that event, and we packed the castle, we rocked the castle. And interestingly, the castle was designed by the same architect who designed White Marsh Hall, Francis's dad's palazzo.
Of course.
So I'm actually doing a book club with Capricorn Books tomorrow night. And so they're going to talk about the book without me. That's where they will rip it to shreds. No, they won't. No. Maybe they will do that. I don't know. From 7 to 7:30. Then on 7:30, I'm coming in, and hopefully the ripping will stop. So I'm so excited to chat with Jackie and everyone in their Capricorn Book Club tomorrow night.
So we've included a link to Capricorn below. Check them out. And then many of the other bookstores that Sarah mentioned we've had on the show, like Wellesley Books, Nantucket, Mitchell's, Porter Square, Trident, I know there was someone else you mentioned I lost. We've had all those bookstores on the show. So we'll drop a link below to the playlist for all of our interviews. You can check them out. So I am really curious what kind of a reader you were as a young person, and what, when you think about the books you read when you were middle grade, childhood, teenager, was there a book that comes to mind that shaped you as a reader and as a writer? Because you've outlined this incredible work you put into crafting Broadway Butterfly, and that sort of relentless curiosity, I think that's what we're saying, that doesn't just sort of like sprout overnight, right? That's something that grows in some other very fertile literary ground. So I'm curious, when you think about yourself when you were younger, what's a book that really shaped you?
Oh my gosh, we are so in Philadelphia. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Oh my gosh, Lynn, come to the Capricorn Books event tomorrow. I'll DM it to you, Lynn. Okay, so I was a voracious reader. I was super shy, super introverted, and I was not like a sporty spice kind of kid. I didn't play any sports or anything. I love to read. And so the first book that I really remember treasuring was The Secret Garden. And I love that book so much. And I read it over and over and over. That was a gift from my Aunt Joan, and I still have it. And it's so, the pages are so well worn and stained from, time's dust, but I love it so much. I still have the inscription that she gave me. And then I was, and I think I was probably, 8 or 9 when I read that. I don't even remember, but I also read every Nancy Drew, and I still have my entire Nancy Drew collection. And for my birthday and Christmas, I would get one Nancy Drew book, and Anne of Green Gables. Oh my God, I loved Anne of Green Gables. And I still have my Anne of Green Gables book. And I remember my grandmother, my family is a family of voracious mystery readers. My Aunt Joan loves mysteries and thrillers. My cousin Caitlin loves mysteries and thrillers. My grandmother loved mysteries and thrillers. And I remember her reading Nancy Drew to us before we could read. And then I remember her reading P.D. James to us probably before we should have been reading or listening to P.D. James. Like, it was violent, but we loved it. Yeah. And so I think, mysteries and thrillers are just in my blood. But I read widely. I love memoirs. I love truth. I love historical. I've always been a voracious reader. I just love books and want to, share the love of reading. And I do a lot for libraries as well. I'm on the board of the Friends of the Library, and do everything I can for libraries as well.
What's on your bedside table right now? What are you reading?
Okay, thank you so much for asking. So I am reading an advanced copy of Jean Kwok's The Leftover Woman.
Oh, we had her on the show for her other book, the one before this. She's amazing.
She's amazing. This one comes out October 10th. And it is so freaking good. I absolutely love her. I love this book. So I'm hosting her on Monday, and then I'm going to her book launch next Tuesday at the Strand in New York, which I'm really excited about because that morning I'm filming my CBS book club interview.
Yes. So tell us about that. I want to make sure we come back to the CBS. Let's not forget that.
Oh. And the Puzzle Master. Oh my God, I love this book.
It's so good.
For my research loving, nerdy girl heart that loves unexplored pockets of history and deep random factoids, yum. This is just my jam, and it is a brilliant book. So I cannot recommend these two books enough. So CBS Book Club. So I am so honored and so thrilled to be the September book club pick. I can't believe it. And so I just got to film. So the first part of the segment in the New York Public Library's famed Rose Reading Room. And they actually don't let you film in there. But because I had done all my research there, they let us film in there. Aww. And because they don't let you film in there while people were in there, we had to go in before it opened, Kimberly. It was very night at the museum, except it was early morning at the library. So to be in that historic, sacred sanctuary of a space filled with knowledge and books and the footsteps of so many readers and writers, in the silence and solitude before it opened was a spiritual experience that I will stay with me for the rest of my life.
Oh,
So 1 week ago today, that's where I was.
And we put a link below to the book club so people can check it out and find out more about what Sarah's doing with CBS New York.
Yes.
Sarah, I've been so curious about this process of bringing your book into the world. You are an experienced social media person. You're a great person to follow on. I know we follow each other, and I love seeing what you're doing on Instagram. You're really right there sharing every development of your process of bringing your book into the world, even like the writing and the editing. We were there with you, and you promote all the authors that you interview. I'm so curious, now that you're in the thick of this launch process, what's the biggest lesson you've learned? Like, even being an experienced social media person, even with all your experience interviewing authors, what's the thing about this whole process of bringing your book into the world that's been a surprising lesson for you? Like, oh, I didn't realize this was going to be so hard or so fun, or like, what's the big takeaway for you?
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, so I spent 14 years in the corporate world building and running publicity programs. So I did PR marketing for 14 years. And now I take those skills and use them, in my work at ITW, International Thriller Raiders. And I also teach and speak around the country on teaching how authors who are generally very shy, people who don't like to toot their own horn. That was my horn tooting motion. Beep, beep. How to do this. Yeah. And what I found, not surprisingly, is that it is very easy for me to hype up other women and say, or other authors, regardless of gender, buy this book. I love this book. Here's this interview. Here's that. And yet when it is time for me to toot my own horn, it's really hard. Yeah. And so I'm sitting with that and I'm thinking, why is this hard? And why is this easy for me to do for others? And why is this a little uncomfortable for me to do for myself? And I know so many of us struggle with that. And so the advice that I would offer is you always want to share from a perspective of service. So you never want to be self-promotional or salesy. And God, that feels so gross and icky for those of us who are not narcissists, right? And so how can we do that in an authentic way? And the answer is to be of service. So how can you share authentically in a way that is of service to those that you're talking to? And so whether it's about sharing, hey, this is hard for me, or hey, this is what I learned, or here's how to do this, or, here's a book that I'm enjoying. I always try to share from a place of service. And I think that makes it more authentic, makes it authentic, and makes it feel real, and also makes it feel more okay.
That's great advice. Yeah. Sarah, will we see another novel from you in the future?
I would love to write another novel, and I plan to.
Excellent. Yay. Thank you so much for being with us today, and congratulations on all of your success with Broadway Butterfly. We hope you continue to fly high.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh, and you're interviewing William Kent Kruger. I love him. Yes. He's so great. I interviewed him last year. He's really lovely.
Yes, so perfect segue to our audience. If you like today's show, and we very much hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events. Or if you're not a Facebook person, no worries. You can hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our newsletter. It goes out once a week and gives you the rundown of all of the shows. Authors Love Bookstores will be back next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will welcome William Kent Kruger. He has a brand new book out. We're excited to talk with him about that. Congratulations again, Sarah, and thank you to our audience. Until we meet again, be well, and of course, keep reading. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.